Welcome to the Inside Carolina podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Ashley. I'm joined by Jason Staples and Greg Barnes. That means it is the Game Plan podcast. Miami, Carolina, 3:30 on Saturday, down in Miami. Before we get started, I want to ask you guys a couple favors. One, we need to support Johnny T-Shirt and JohnnyT-Shirt.com. They are consistently having sales as the holidays approach. Use them, buy your Carolina gear for you, your loved ones, or me. You can send me some Carolina gear. I'll send you my address. We can always use it, but most importantly, Johnny T-Shirt can always use the business. And also rate us on Apple Podcasts. Give us a 5-star rating. Drop a question in there. We'll get to it and subscribe. Let's get right into it, boys. Earlier in the week, Greg, Jason Staples, and I discussed the biggest Tar Heel games in recent history, and I contend that this one on Saturday is as big as any of them since the ACC Championship game in 2015. What sayeth you?
Yeah, I mean, if you phrase it like that, is this the biggest game since 2015, considering that North Carolina won 5 games in a 2-year span since then? We're 500 last year. I guess you can make that argument. However, I would say that when you're number 5 in the country and everybody's looking at you and you go down to Tallahassee and completely lay an egg against a team that's not good, this game would have been a lot bigger if you take care of business. And that's what the program building aspect is. You got to win those games. You're going to lose games sometimes against a team like Virginia on their home field because Virginia is a pretty good team. But you got to take care of business against the bad teams. And North Carolina did not do that. And so I'm hesitant to put too much emphasis on this game because they're out of the ACC race. That's over and done with. They're really just kind of building for next year, which has the potential to be a special year. But given how everything's played out and the fact that they have a chance to play in the Orange Bowl, okay, I mean, that's a big bowl. It doesn't carry the weight. It did before college football playoff because there used to be only 4 big bowl games. Now there's 6. But even so, that's a high profile game on January 2nd. Good for recruiting. But yeah, I have a hard time putting too much emphasis on this particular game in that regard, just because of wasted opportunities earlier in the year.
Yeah, I mean, here's the Orange Bowl. It still carries the name weight. I agree with you. It's not as important as it once was when it was one of those New Year's Day bowls that we always look forward to seeing when we were growing up. And I'm going to freely admit, the folks on YouTube probably wondering where Jason went. Jason's doing daddy duty. So he has done this podcast from the hospital. He's done this podcast from the road. Now he's doing it as Arnold Schwarzenegger in – oh, no, it was Eddie Murphy in Daddy Daycare. So
I think you're talking about maybe Kindergarten Cop.
Yeah, that's it.
Not a tumor.
See, Tommy, when we started doing this podcast, I think your boys are a little bit old, but when we started doing this podcast, we hadn't even thought about doing it on YouTube. So I did plenty of them with my daughter on my lap 10 years ago. But I didn't have to worry about people wondering where I was on the screen.
Yeah. Changes everything once we're on video.
Don't get me started, man. It's been that
week. We can do this entire episode as Arnold if we want.
Put Arnold away, Jason, and tell me why you think the game you said was bigger than this one on our game.
It's hard in hindsight, right? That's the thing is in hindsight, I would say that the South Carolina game, the first game of Mack's tenure, is bigger than this game, and it's going to remain the biggest game until further notice, simply because that was a game that North Carolina, even when North Carolina was at its peak under Larry Fedora, they consistently lost that game. Right? That was the game where even against a middling SEC team opener, you've got a good chance to beat them. You should beat them. All you have to do is run freaking Hood up the middle 3 times inside the 5-yard line, and you win. And they lose that game over and over. You have a chance to beat Georgia, a good SEC team, and you find ways to to squander that one away, for Mack Brown to come in game one and beat South Carolina in that game, in that context, with a true freshman quarterback from the city of Charlotte, it's going to be hard to top that one in terms of importance for the program, in terms of what that did for recruiting, what that did for Mack basically being able to stake his flag in the ground and be like, the Mack is back. This is my neighborhood. I left for a little while. Some people came in, started acting like they were big man on campus. South Carolina's little brother, NC State, will show you guys who the brand is in North Carolina soon. All of this stuff that's set in motion by that first win. Now, going into it, none of us thought it would be that big, because it's one of those where, well, what do you expect this year? It's year one, all that. It'd be a really big game. I remember we talked about it. It'd be a really big game if they won it, just because of the implications. But, if you lose it, that's kind of how things have been. But to win that game was so big. Whereas with this one, the thing that's really frustrating is North Carolina could win this game, could beat Miami, and the Orange Bowl still take Miami.
Yep.
And just because Miami's from Miami, and they may think that in COVID time, that's going to get a few more people to come or whatever else if they're fans. That may end up happening. I mean, who knows what's going to happen there? Oh, well, we want to minimize travel, or just any number of things. So to me, this is one of those games that it's definitely, I would say, top 5, probably top 4 in the Mack era. But I would say it would, and I agree with Greg that the Florida State game earlier in the year, when top 5 ranking, national game, that one also comes in above this one. And this one would be that much bigger if they hadn't laid an egg in the first half in that game. And I say in the first half because they won the rest of the game. So, after about the first quarter and a half, they won the rest of that game, and people forget that. But yeah, I think this is an important game, but it's not the most important.
It's still too early to think about that Florida State game, because God, that'll go down similar to the South Carolina game in 2015 as to that game is the one that kept us from having the special season. Greg, looking at it though, let's talk about this purely as a win or loss. I think winning this game is hugely important. I'm not necessarily one to think that if they lost, it is that detrimental. Where do you stand there?
Yeah, I think it is important. Again, I'm trying to look at this year especially, not only because of COVID and everything that this year has entailed, but just I'm trying to look at the Mack Brown time period, the era as a whole, and not get too ramped up over each individual week. I'll let the fans do that, because that's, when you live and die by each win and loss, I get it. But this is going to be a process, and this is going to be a situation where last year, before the season started, everybody was telling people behind the scenes, Mack and company were telling people behind the scenes, get to a bowl game. Like, let's try to get to 500. Let's get to a bowl game, and we'll be happy. We'll try to build on that. Same thing this year, right? Not necessarily get to a bowl game. Let's do better than we did last year. Let's try to get to 7 and 8 wins. Let's show development. Let's show improvement. I think they knew there was going to be some concerns defensively, and then really set the stage for 2021 to be this year where the team can be good enough in all 3 phases to challenge for the Coastal title and to have a legitimate shot to get to the ACC Championship game and maybe win it. And so I think within that context, this game is important, because if you lose this one, we've talked about before, you lose this one, your best game this year is a win over an NC State team without a starting quarterback. That is the feather in your cap. And then you're talking about finishing at 7 and 4 with a really bad loss at Florida State. You talk about must wins, Tommy. That makes the bowl game really a must win, because the last thing you want to do is finish 7 and 5 with 3 of your last 4 games being losses. So I do think from that perspective, this is a very important game, not just to play well, but to be able to win. So that regardless of what happens in the bowl game, you can take a successful season into 2021, into the spring season. You can sell that to recruits, and that really sets you up for a good year next year.
Yeah, the way you detail the worst case scenario, the losses, it kind of reminds me of a previous coaching staff's season. 8-4, 8-5 with a bunch of crap at the end. It seemed like that was the thing to do back there. Jason, let's move on to the game a little bit. Of course, after the break, we'll directly talk about the game plan portion, but you can't hear about Miami without hearing about De'Aaron King. And everybody that knows, it's not just a Carolina thing, but for Carolina purposes, they've struggled with guys that can run. And, I didn't think he was a great passer until I watched him cook NC State in that ball game, throwing some good balls. But the one thing I look at is he is a full 200 yards better, if these stats on the Miami website are correct, than any Miami running back. After sack yardage included, he's 400 yards better if you include sack yardage, or if you don't take away the sack yardage. But that in itself has got to scare a lot of North Carolina fans. Got to scare Jay Bateman as well, right?
Yeah, he's actually, when you factor in sack yardage, I think he's second on the team in rushing to Cameron Harris, but it's close.
Right.
And once you take out sack yardage, well, I think he's actually the leading rusher for him. And, I know North Carolina fans probably believe, like every other team like every other fan base in the country, probably believe that North Carolina is uniquely bad at stopping running quarterbacks, but they're not. Everybody struggles with it. It's hard for everybody. Now, North Carolina's not good at it so far this year. They have struggled with it. And all you have to do is look at that Florida State game that we've brought up a couple times. Florida State had a quarterback who runs like King does, but is a little more limited as a passer. And he was able to get free and make some key plays. You look at the first offensive play of that game for Florida State, and that's exactly what North Carolina has to prevent in this game. And when I broke that play down a few weeks back to show what happened, everybody, the scheme, the play call, everything was in position for that to be a tackle for loss. One guy stepped the wrong way, and it's a touchdown. That's the stuff that will burn you with King. That's what kills you with a running quarterback, is there's a lot less margin for error in your fits, in your run fits, and in your rush lanes. When you've got it's the same thing as when you have a great passer. When you're playing against the Elf, when you're playing against Trevor Lawrence, or when you're playing against Sam Howell, and Sam's got time to throw, your corners, your safeties, your linebackers, all your coverage players have to be pretty much perfect. Because if there's a seam there, that guy's going to find it. And all of a sudden, you're going to look at some potential big plays. It's the same way with a guy like De'Aaron King as a running quarterback, where against a normal quarterback, that's not an issue. Like, you're 2 feet, 3 feet out of your proper lane. You're coming on the blitz and you're knocked off your landmark by a yard. Against a normal quarterback, that doesn't matter. Against King, that might be 60. And that's the problem. And he does throw it better than, say, Travis for Florida State does. He throws it better than some of the runners that North Carolina has played so far this year. Although I will say, I think a lot in this game depends on which De'Aaron King shows up, because he's been really hot and cold as a thrower this year. He's had some games where he's missed 3 or 4 throws that could have blown the game open for them, and just absolutely airmailed a guy who's wide open down the field, on a vertical route that is a throw that, you, Greg, or I could all make potentially, and he just missed it. And then you go back to, actually, honestly, the best thing that could happen for this game, I think, for North Carolina is if it's a rainy game, because he struggled throwing the football when it's wet. So you go back to that Virginia game that they played. Virginia very nearly beat him in a very close game, and he missed a bunch of throws in that game. And it was a wet ball. It was a wet game. And I suspect he's got small hands given his height. I suspect he's got smaller than average hands, and that may play into this. But that's one of those things where pray for rain, I guess. But he's been a streaky thrower either way, even with a dry ball. When he's on, if he's hitting those throws down the field that you're going to try to force him to make, then you tip your cap. Miami's probably going to win the game. If you're getting the guy that played against Virginia, if you're getting the guy that has played, a half here, a half there, where he's been scattershot, North Carolina might win the football game just by virtue of that. So inconsistency there, but the key is really you've got to start by stopping his legs.
Greg, let me correct myself. Since Miami's official site, their stats were jacked up. It was not organized right. You're right. Cameron Harris is the leading rusher on that team. De'Aaron King second by a very large margin. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, I was just going to say with De'Aaron King, I do think Jason's on point here with when we talk about the rain and some of these things. His only limitation is kind of his size. Listen to this offseason. Listen to Rhett Lashley, an interview with him talking about King when they got him. It was really fascinating to listen to him because he really made the point that look, is he the fastest guy? Nah. Is he the quickest? Nah. He's short. Is he the best thrower of the football? Nah. I mean, he's better than average, but he's no Sam Howell. But what it comes down to is the kid is a winner. We talk about it more with basketball than we do football, but some kids just have it, right? They have the ability to win games and to make plays when they have to make plays. And that's what King does. And so I understand it, but you see it a lot on the message boards like, he's not that great of a passer. Some of his deep balls are wobbly and you do. I mean, if you look just strictly at mechanics and you look at how he does things and his size, without looking at the full picture, it is easy to think, he's good. I don't know how he's as good as he is, but he's good. But he's just very impressive in getting things done. And they utilize that RPO game quite a bit. I think the fact that Lashley, really was born and bred in Gus Malzahn's system. The fact that he was quarterback for Gus in high school is just a trip to me. But when he was at Auburn as OC, and granted, that was Gus's offense, but Auburn, they averaged over 250 yards on the ground in 3 to 4 years that he was helping run the offense. So he's got that skill set. He understands what it takes to run the ball successfully. And one of the reasons that they parted ways is he wanted to put more of a passing offense in, which is why he's got some of those air raid concepts. But he understands how to use players that are dual threats. And I think that's one of the reasons it's helped Miami's offense dramatically this year. But just the fact that Lashley understands how to maximize a kid like King's talents and the fact that King is he's a winner. That's what he is one of the reasons they've had so much success this year.
So before we go to the break, I want to bring up one thing here, and there's a big split with De'Aaron King between no pressure and under pressure. So all the caveats of Pro Football Focus numbers aside, I mean, obviously they're not perfect, but his no pressure, his not under pressure stats, 67.4 completion percentage, 8.4 yards per attempt, 18 touchdowns, 4 picks, and a grade, an overall grade, Pro Football Focus, of 93.7 when not under pressure. Folks, that is elite. 93.7 is really good. Under pressure, 44% completion percentage, 2 touchdowns, no picks. That no picks is important. 23 sacks, and a 53 overall grade from Pro Football Focus. So when he's under pressure, based on Pro Football Focus grades, he's half as good as when he doesn't have pressure. And that includes, by the way, when he's pressured and has to scramble and all of that stuff. So this is one of those games where a lot of people might think, your best bet, given how well he runs, is You just need to rush your 4 defensive linemen and just let him run, let him try to throw it downfield. If you do that where there's no
She
if you
agrees.
do
She
that,
agrees.
sorry everybody.
She agrees. Yeah.
If you do that where there's nobody or where there's nobody in his face and he's able to sit back with no pressure, he's had a ton of success. When you do that where you're able to get any pressure on him at all, so I think there's going to need to be some emphasis on getting pressure in the context of in the context of making sure that you keep him contained. That can really change things for you. So I think that has to be a big emphasis for North Carolina this week, is finding ways to get pressure on him while not getting out of control and giving those run lanes up the field.
Yeah, and the challenge there, Tommy, is when you look at what he's done when he's been blitzed, his numbers are again really good. They're 88.6 grade. He's got a 70%, 69.4% adjusted completion percentage, 8 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. So there is a difference there. Jason's not saying, hey, just blitz him, get pressure on him. You have to successfully get pressure on him. And that's the challenge. And what we've seen Jay Bateman do a lot this year, and we can get into this in the game plan portion, but he'll overload one side, but still only send 4 people. And so those are the kind of things you're going to have to look for instead of just sending a bunch of 5-man and 6-man blitzes, because that's a tough ask for this defense to do and expose yourself so much down the field.
Now, the good thing is that Miami doesn't have traditional Miami receivers in terms of, I mean, they've got some good ones and they got some guys that can beat you deep and can run by you, but they're not, there's no Andre Johnson among this group. So that helps. But yeah, you can't just blitz him. You have to get pressure. I do think if there's anything that if I'm Jay Bateman, one thing, and I know we're getting ahead of ourselves in the game plan part here. If I'm Jay Bateman, one of the things that I do here is I want to put my best interior pass rusher over their right guard a lot, because I think that right guard has given up some pressure based on just watching games, and I actually haven't looked at it on Pro Football Focus, but I think there's some weakness there between the center and the right guard, and I'd want to put some guys there to try to get some penetration up the middle, and that's where Bohasic or particularly Miles Murphy with his height and wingspan, if you can compress the pocket on him from the inside with those guys that are bigger with a shorter quarterback, that really affects them. And so I think that's something that you have to do in this game to have success.
Indeed. Let's take a break and get to that game plan portion, because it's going to be an interesting one. Let me talk about Johnny T-Shirt. I mentioned them earlier. They're certainly proud sponsors of the Inside Carolina podcast and friends of Inside Carolina. Most of all, friends of you, the Inside Carolina listener, if you're a premium subscriber, because you get that 10%. So I see sales every day with their email list, including whatever you could possibly want at Johnny T-Shirt, sweatshirts, jerseys, gifts for your lady, gifts for your man, tailgating, all that kind of stuff. Gifts for your kids if you want to buy your kids anything for Christmas.
For your lady.
For your lady. And anything you could possibly want, please shop them. I know there are other places out there to buy stuff, but Johnny T-Shirt's what you need to support. I mean, you need to shop local more than ever. Now's the time to do that locally, owned and operated alumni. What else can you ask for a store that sends you Carolina gear? They're all about Carolina, and they're all about Inside Carolina. Take care of them as they take care of us. We'll take a short break. National guys pay the bills. We'll be right back. Game plan, Jason, Greg, and all that Jason's got going on, and a new book. We'll be right back. We're back. It's the Inside Carolina podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Ashley. It's the game plan. I've got Greg Barnes and Jason Staples. Jason Staples on triple duty. So let's get into it, boys. D'Eriq King and Carolina's in Miami's defense. I'm watching Jason on YouTube, but if you're not watching on YouTube, you're missing out. D'Eriq King in Miami's offense versus Carolina's defense. Greg, I listened to Jay Bateman a lot this week and listened to you guys talking to him. I mean, I think you could learn a lot from the Notre Dame game as a defensive coordinator and maybe as a player, but I'm not so sure that it's the same as it'll be down in Miami. So What can Carolina do better and more effectively than they did against that Notre Dame team that basically had their way?
Well, I think what people need to understand is for North Carolina to have success defensively in any game right now, because they do not have a talent advantage up front against most teams, they have to execute, I don't want to say flawlessly, but almost. And so the games where they've played well, and Notre Dame is one of them, they communicated very well. And everybody knew what they were supposed to be doing. And they, for the most part, they executed. Did they lose at the point of attack sometimes? Yeah, that's going to happen against a front like Notre Dame has. And the fact that Notre Dame had success, I think kind of speaks to the fact that North Carolina, when they were doing what they were supposed to be doing, they still lost and gave up 31 points in that game. And that just kind of speaks to where this team has to grow. But when they've had success and they've battled, it's because they've done all the little things correct. And that's what's got to happen here. And so I think we need to lay that down first, first and foremost. That's the most important aspect. And then the other thing is you really have to decide. I'd like to hear Jason's take on this. I thought North Carolina did a pretty good job in terms of their approach with Ian Book. Were there some breakdowns? Yes, and Jason highlighted the Trey Morrison play pretty well. That's kind of a glaring play early in that game. But they had opportunities to get Book down and just didn't. And so schematically, that's what you want. You want to put yourself in position to be able to make plays that drop the quarterback for a loss. And so I think from that standpoint, they did okay. And that's kind of what you're looking for here. Now, King's going to do a lot more RPO stuff. That's kind of where a lot of his runs come from. So it's a little bit different than what Notre Dame necessarily is going to do. But kind of the same idea. And a lot of teams, when they run RPO stuff, you're going to go for the running back because you want the quarterback to run. It's probably not the case in this situation. And so you're going to have to be a little bit more conservative in how you handle those things. But if you can keep him in the pocket, that's kind of what you're looking for. When you look at what Miami does offensively, a little bit surprising. I mean, North Carolina is averaging, I think, 3.3 explosive plays of 30 yards or more per game. Miami's at 3.2. So pretty even in terms of what they've done. Miami does have more rushing plays that have gone for long yardage. So North Carolina has to be aware of that. I think by trying to contain King and keep him in the pocket, that allows you to compress the pocket if you get a good push. And that's where you get into some of those issues that he can have. I think that's the primary thing. They do have some good tight ends, maybe the best pair in the ACC. And so that's something to watch out for. Lashley likes to use these bunch formations with his halfbacks or tight ends. And then they do have a good running back. So it's not a great offense necessarily, but it's an effective offense primarily because of what King does. And that's the challenge, trying to scheme around him.
Jason, looking at Miami's offense, Greg mentioned the tight ends. I mean, that should be worrisome there, maybe even more than King. Because if you
I agree.
If you look at what Wake Forest, and I don't know if it equates, but the way Wake Forest was able to get matchups on linebackers and wear Carolina out, I see them being able to do that. But I want you to talk about that aspect. But does Miami, from your watching the Hurricanes, do they have an offensive line that can just manhandle Carolina's front like Notre Dame did at times?
I've not been impressed by Miami's offensive line this year, to be honest. I would put them in that group of offensive lines it's not great, but is above average, perhaps. Average to above average. I don't think they're as good as North Carolina's offensive line. So, but I think North Carolina's offensive line is very talented overall. There have been some breakdowns, and a few of the guys this year I feel like could lose a little bit of weight going into next year. But overall, my impression has been that Miami schemed around some offensive line issues at times, and that King has covered over some offensive line issues at other times. And, that's really – if you watch the Clemson game, you watch their offensive line just get manhandled. And that's not what happened in Notre Dame against Clemson. I mean, you look at the numbers against Clemson, and they're ugly. I'm going to pull up the rushing numbers against Clemson here. 25 carries, for 89 yards, 3.56 yards per carry. And if I remember correctly, there was one breakout run in the second half. And I think that was King for like 50 of those yards. They averaged under 2 yards a carry through most of the game. There was one run that didn't matter, but the game was out of hand by that point, that raised that yards per carry, and they just couldn't run it. And that was because they got manhandled up front. Now, North Carolina is not going to manhandle that offensive line, but I have seen some weaknesses there that I think Bateman and Carolina can take advantage of. Like I said, I think you can, if you put a strong guy like Bohasic over their right guard, I think you can move him backwards. I think you can get some position in the backfield. I think both of their tackles have at times been speed rushed a little bit this year. So, you've got some opportunities there. And I agree with Greg. I think they did a really good job of scheming for Book. And I think a lot of the same stuff that they did for Book, they can do in this game, but they should have a little more success with it up front than they did against Notre Dame, who, when I've gone back and I've looked at the Notre Dame tape, collecting some of the clips that I've done the last couple of weeks, I just am so impressed by how not only well schooled those guys are, but how disciplined they were up front. I mean, those guys, they just, even when a guy was off balance and wasn't in exactly the right position, he knew exactly how to recover and get his hands on a guy and take a play from being a 5-yard gain to a 15-yard gain just by that. And I don't see that from Miami as much. So decent, gonna give some North Carolina some problems at times, yes, but I don't think that this is a line that is going to manhandle Carolina up front, or it shouldn't. And I think that there are some things that Carolina can do. Like I said, I like what they did against Book. One of the things that they did, by the way, is that they actually usually try to get Surratt as the free runner up against the quarterback who's let's say scrambling. In that game, they would bring Surratt as a rusher and spring Gemmel to be that guy that would run, just to give a different look at times. And they would try to force the quarterback to run one specific direction, these sorts of things. So if you are going to leave the pocket, you're going to have to leave the pocket here. And we've got one guy who's got his eyes on the quarterback who can come up and make the tackle there. That's the kind of stuff that you can do. I expect to see that stuff from Bateman and his defense this time around.
Talk about the tight ends. Brevin Jordan obviously gets all the ink. Will Mallory's certainly solid. And like I said,
Mallory's not a whole lot worse than Jordan. I mean, Jordan arguably is the best tight end in the country. He's, I think, probably the number one NFL prospect among the tight ends in the country. And Will Mallory is right there with him. He's just as good. He's a better blocker than Jordan. Jordan's become a better blocker in the last year or two, but Mallory's a better blocker and a more complete player. And when you put both of those guys on the field at the same time, that's what's going to cause North Carolina problems.
Yeah, Greg, that leaves the question is, who covers those guys for North Carolina? I mean, Conley has gotten a lot of playing time. Is it him? Is it Gemmel? Gemmel has struggled with defending pass catching routes at times, receiving routes at times. I brought up the Wake Forest game. They took advantage of it. Just freely admit that. And so where does Jay Bateman go to contain those guys?
Well, that's one of the things about what Bateman and a lot of these other defensive coordinators around the country are trying to do, right? I mean, you're basically playing a base nickel these days. And the reason you do that is because you have more wide receivers playing, but also because with the nickel back, you want a little bit bigger guy so that he can come up and help and run support. Well, kind of the opposite is true when you're talking about trying to defend the tight ends, because years ago, tight ends were basically a sixth offensive lineman, and they would just wear you out. You could put a defensive end over top of them, or maybe even a big linebacker, and that would work. And so that's one of the reasons that you see guys like Des Evans and Chris Collins, who really are linebackers, but they're big enough to be physical at the point of attack. And that's why, again, I think Jason's breaking down of Trey Morrison's play against Ian Book is critically important, because he's the type of guy that you would like to be able to put on one of these tight ends, because if he can handle them at line of scrimmage against the run. But then if they decide to release whichever way they want to go, you hand it off vertically, but running side to side, he could stay with them. as long as he knows exactly what he's supposed to be doing. In that particular play that Jason outlined, he was still in a growing phase, I think we would call that. And so that's
there were 3 or 4 in a row on that series where it was like, oh, what is he doing?
So eventually that's what you want, right? You want that type of guy to handle these types of situations. North Carolina just is not there yet personnel wise. And so, yeah, it's going to be an interesting thing, because do you go with kind of a more of a 3-4 look with 4 defensive backs in? Although Bateman this year, his base has been that nickel package. And so those are the decisions he has to make, because you want Chaz Surratt really to be able to key in on King and serve as somewhat of a spy there. And you want Gilmore to do a lot of different things. So I don't know. I mean, maybe you do use one of those guys like a Chris Collins to try to track them as best you can. Or if you have to, you would use a nickel back. But I don't know that's the approach. I'm curious to hear Jason's take on this.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. I mean, I think a lot of it depends on how Miami calls it. I mean, what personnel groups are they going to use? And if I'm Miami and I've watched the Notre Dame game, I'm using a lot of too tight.
Oh yeah,
I'm putting both of those guys on the field at once, and I'm going to force North Carolina to match up with bigger personnel that's younger by and large. Either younger or too small. I mean, that's really the problem, is you got basically older guys that are small and not as physical, have some limitations, or you got younger guys that are bigger, still not grown into their paws, as it were, and don't know what they're doing. So you kind of have those as your choices. And so I would expect them to go with a lot of too tight. And I would, Notre Dame had their most success when they put the 2 tight ends on the same side of the field, and they ran some of those tight bunch formations. They ran, tight end H-back on the same side of the field with a receiver tight. I wouldn't be surprised to see Miami do a lot of the same stuff. And if they do that, then to me, Bateman's going to have to go big. He's going to have to go more of a 3-4 look. And the real question is, who's your 4th safety going to be? I mean, do you want to go bigger there? Because at a certain point, Miami wants to win this game while throwing the ball as little as they can. I mean, that's I know Lashley, he's added a lot more of some of the air raid type stuff to the Malzahn formula, but it's still a Malzahn offense in its DNA. And that offense, as much as any, if they can run it on you 56 times and throw it 10 times and have success, that's what they'd prefer to do. So you got to force them away from being able to run the football, and you got to stop the run first. And then they'll come at you with verticals. And if you can stop the run and the verticals, that's when you finally start getting the other stuff.
Yep.
So,
Tommy, let me add this real quick, Jason. Lashley said, I like this phrase. He says, I want to run the ball to win, and I want to pass the ball to score.
Interesting.
That's Malzahn's philosophy. And what they mean by that is this is the old option kind of approach, right? The old triple option teams, you go back to Nebraska and, all the way back. Paul Johnson. Those teams would run the ball and if they were successful running the ball, they're probably going to win the game. But they would always have, they'd have their quarterbacks that would average like 26 yards of completion, right? Because they'd run it to win, but then they'd throw it to score. When they're throwing, they're trying to score. They're throwing it down the field. They're trying to threaten you because you're doing something to take away that run that's making you vulnerable to some vertical concept down the field. And they're going to try to hit that and hurt you enough that you're going to have to pull back so they can run it on you again. And that really is the DNA here. And so to me, this is a game where I think Conley becomes a potentially important player. There are 3 players. I mean, obviously Surratt and Gemmel are going to be important in every game. So excluding them, this is a game where, to me, if North Carolina is going to win, odds are you're going to see a lot of Miles Murphy making big plays. You're going to see him flash. You're going to see him getting some pressure on the quarterback. You're going to see him on the field. I think this is a game where he has to have a good game. I think this is a game where Conley could flash, and this is a game where if Evans can flash, if those three guys can have some success in this game, that bodes well for North Carolina. If they're all on the field and doing their jobs, those guys, the physical characteristics that they bring in against what Miami and Lashley want to do gives North Carolina some ability to defend some of that stuff. So to me, those are three guys I'm going to have my eye on every time they're on the field, just because of how they change some of the matchup disadvantages that North Carolina might have otherwise.
Interesting take. Let's flip it. I mean, we could talk about Miami's offense versus Carolina's defense for the entire show, couple shows, but let's flip it, Greg, offensively. You know, I look at the State-Miami game was 44-41. And then I look and see Miami plays the Virginia-type game, 19-14. How does Carolina come out to – Mike Ingersoll always talks about Miami being front runners and how when they're up, but when they're down, they're down. We've talked a lot on this show about the importance of Carolina getting out fast. And in the games they've won, they've tended to do that. They got up early on Notre Dame. It didn't last, but what does Longo do here? We've seen some failed trips to Florida already this season. Does anything change with Longo's approach for this Miami game, or do you think it's pretty much how they've played all year thus far?
Yeah, I would assume that Longo is going to try to scheme around Miami's aggressiveness. One thing they do so well is they utilize their defensive ends, that entire defensive front, but they really push up the field. And one thing that Mack Brown noted this week, and I thought it was an interesting tell, I don't know if it was gamesmanship or what, but he just mentioned how that they do a very good job of moving vertically. And what that does is for teams that like to pull, that can kind of disrupt those lanes. And Jason has done some good film work breakdown this year, showing how when teams are able to push up the field, that pulling guard will kind of get blocked out, and it just blows up the entire play, and the running back has nowhere to go. So that's what Miami is going to try to do. And where North Carolina has had a lot of success is really taking advantage of those little slants and the routes over the middle. And that seems to loosen up things up front for them. So I would assume that's in the wheelhouse. I will say, because of that defensive front for Miami, they have really been effective in kind of limiting explosive plays. I mean, they're tops in the ACC in allowing 30 yards or more plays. They've only allowed 16 all year in 9 games. That's tops in the league. So they have been effective. However, their secondary is not their strength. And so that's really a testament what those guys are doing up front. So what Longo has to do, you need to be able to run the ball. Teams have been able to run against Miami. It's not a defensive front as good as Notre Dame's. But you've got to – Miami has been successful in kind of knocking you down for a loss, and that kind of gets your offense behind the chains, and that's where they've had their success. So how he counters that pressure, I think, is going to be the key here. And how he wants to use Michael Carter and Javonte Williams in that regard is going to be important. Jason, do you think the RPO game is even more important here to try to offset some of that pressure?
Yeah, I do. And I think the other thing that's interesting to me is that they've got two really good ends, as you mentioned in up front. They've got 2 really good ends, one of which North Carolina was really close to landing.
And Phillips is like a top 10 prospect.
Yeah, he both guys are really good ends. And so that's one of the things right away that tells you, yeah, RPO and those guys is probably a good idea, just because when you're pass protecting against those ends, that's going to be tough. That's tough for anybody that plays Miami, is pass protection against those ends. So you don't want to get into second, third, and long situations and have to pass protect straight up against those guys. The more you can force them to defend the run while you're trying to throw the ball, the better on that stuff. The other thing, though, that's interesting to me on that is that both ends, particularly Roche at times this year, I've seen teams run at him with some success. Both guys have been a little bit less with Phillips. Phillips has been better than I thought he'd be this year. He was not very impressive before he got to Coral Gables, and he's had a bit of a breakout year. And he's been more of a two-way end, in my view, in the games that I've seen than Roche. But basically, you've seen teams just straight up, we're going to run it right at Roche. We're gonna force him to take on a blocker and win that battle. And he hasn't won those battles as often as I would have expected. And this is a place where with Tucker, for example, I think there's a chance to be able to mash him a little bit because he really wants to get upfield. Use that. And this is a good game for using that aggressiveness against Miami. Use that aggressiveness of those ends getting upfield, get them out of the play and get up into the backers. And I don't think Miami's backers are quite as good as they've been in the last 3 or 4 years as well. So this is one of those places where I think Carolina has a chance to be able to run it reasonably well against this Miami team. The problem is that they're going to have to run it well to win the game. I mean, this is a game where I think, and it's been the case all year, if North Carolina does not outrush Miami, they're going to lose the game. And that's going to start with being able to run it. I think running on the edges against those ends is going to be one of the places where that starts. And a lot of the RPO game, you're doing that already. So that's where you control the backers and run on the edge against those ends to keep them honest. And then if those backers start to cheat too much, that's where you RPO. So yeah, I think it's really important in this game.
Greg, talking about Roche and Phillips, it sort of reminds me of what State had back during the Boning years with Mario Williams. And Carolina would run straight at them with a guy like Barrington Edwards. I remember being in Raleigh and Carter Finley, and State fans couldn't believe that Carolina could just run straight at him. And if he's not able to chase, and it's the same thing with Roche, if he's not able to chase, then you can neutralize him like Jason talked about. Their tackles for losses, Roche and Phillips both have 14. And if my staff math is correct, that's as many as Carolina's top 4 guys combined. Greg, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say one of the issues with having a smaller, well, let's say smaller, maybe a not as physical center as Brian Anderson, is that North Carolina against some of these teams with better fronts, they have not had a lot of success running the ball up the middle, and that's why when you look at where Carter and Javonte have had some of their big plays, it's off the edges. And so that's good news in terms of being able maybe to go at the ends. The bad news is that you can't offset that pressure occasionally. And so there's going to have to be a blend there that works. And so that's part of the challenge.
So Jason said, you say they have to run it. So Greg, I'll ask you this as we move towards the end of this podcast. Sam Howell or Carter and Williams? Who have to be the MVPs for North Carolina to win this game?
Well, I think Jason's right that North Carolina has to be able to run the ball successfully because, I mean, think about what Sam Howell's done this year. I mean, he threw for all kinds of yards at Virginia, 450 or whatever it was, and they lost. He threw for 550 against Wake Forest, and they almost lost that game. The defense is getting better. The defense is still not good, not to where you can have off days offensively. And so we know Sam Howell is going to be successful because that's kind of what he does. And yeah, I mean, I think Javonte or Michael Carter, and maybe it is Michael Carter. Maybe you don't necessarily need a physical approach. Maybe you need speed up the middle. And I think not up the middle, but just vertically. What you don't want to do is try to run on Miami east to west. That's not going to happen. They have too much good team speed. So you have to find your holes and your gaps and explode up the field. And I think you can have some success in that regard.
Yeah, I felt that's what Carolina not necessarily ran wide against Notre Dame, but I thought Carter and Javonte danced too much, for lack of a better way of putting it, Jason. They were seeking the holes that they were able to find against lesser teams, and by the time that hole may have opened, there was somebody on their backs. Jason, your MVPs on Carolina's offense for Carolina to have success on this one.
Yeah, I'm going to go with it's got to be Carter and Williams. They have to ball out in this game. This game. And I mean, the thing is, Carter and Williams are very much dependent on how well the offensive line handles things. I mean, all these things go together, but Carter and Williams have to have a game in order to beat this Miami team. It's a good Miami team, and they're going to score some points on Carolina. That offense, they're going to score some points. You're going to have to score some points to beat them. And I think given how good Miami has been at preventing long pass plays, and they played some quality opponents in that. Given how good they've been at preventing that, I think that's where Carter and Williams have to be the guys that drive that engine. Now, Al Blades being out, Al Blades Jr. in this game, their top defensive back, Miami's top defensive back, I think is a big deal, because he's a guy that they almost certainly would have had covering De'Ami Brown. I think that does make them more vulnerable to getting gashed a little bit down the field in the passing game. So I'm going to say Carter and Williams, but I'm going to cheat a little bit and say, with Al Blades out, the other guy that I'm kind of glancing toward is De'Ami Brown, because he's a guy that, one or two big plays from him could turn this game. And so, that's where Miami hasn't given up a bunch of big plays, but without their bell cow defensive back out there, maybe they do. And then you got to wonder what that does to them psychologically, defensively. What does that do to them in terms of how they scheme or how they feel like they can stop things? That may loosen some things up for Carolina as well. And if I'm Phil Longo, I'm wanting to find the replacement, isolate him against a guy that I know can run by him or that I feel can run a route and make sure he's open on that guy. And I'm going to test him early. I want to make sure that guy can play at the level that Blades can, and I don't think he can.
Yeah, and Tommy, this is 20 games ago, so not as relevant as it might be, but same schemes. So I'll throw it out there. Last year, Miami held UNC below 100 yards rushing, 2.7 yards per carry, and Sam Howell, of course, had a good day, threw for about 300 yards, about 12 yards per attempt. So I think everybody remembers the 4th and 17, which kind of I guess South Carolina started his legend, but that 4th and 17 play was probably the best play of the year for him. And so that was another one where Sam did what Sam does and made enough plays down the stretch to pull that one out. It's going to be more. They're going to need more balance, more ability to run the ball, I think, to win this time around.
Miami has a great field goal kicker too.
It's a much better Miami offense than they played last year. That's the thing. Last year, you could beat that Miami team scoring, what was it? It was 28.
Yeah, 28-25.
Yeah, 28-25. You could beat that Miami team last year scoring 28 points. I'll be surprised. And honestly, if Jay Bateman's defense gives up 25 points in this game and only 25 points, then Mack Brown needs to take him out to a really nice steak dinner as soon as they get back to Chapel Hill, because man, that guy will have earned, that whole defensive staff will have earned themselves a week's long, banquet at Ruth's Chris or something, whatever their high end steakhouse choice is, because this Miami team is going to score points most likely, and you're going to need to score more than 28 to win this game.
Steak and lobster for the boys if they win. I mentioned the field goal kicker because Borregales is 17 for 19 with a long of 57. We never talk about special teams on this podcast, and I got a feeling 1 out of 11 games is going to be relevant. And so I wanted to mention it. It's been relevant in the past,
and they signed his brother, so we're going to be hearing that name for a long time in Miami.
Yeah, that was interesting. The folks that follow recruiting know why that is interesting, and how all that went down. So anyway, Greg, make a pick. I don't know what the line is. What's the line now? It's like basically pick them if it was a neutral field.
Yeah, I think it's still around 3. I think this is a situation, and I completely understand about Miami being front runners and all those kinds of things, and that certainly has been the case. I think now that they actually have a legitimate quarterback for the first time in what seems like forever, I mean maybe since Ken Dorsey, that changes things because the defense is good. It's not necessarily an elite defense, but it's a really good defense. And when you pair that with De'Aaron King and kind of what he can do, that makes this a very tough game. And so I think the fact that Miami has taken care of business this year. I mean, their one loss is Clemson. Have they been in some ugly games? Yes. Have they won all of those games? Yes. Has North Carolina won all of their ugly games? No. And so I think that's the difference, that Miami's defense is better than North Carolina's defense. And so because of that, I've got Miami winning this one 42-35.
All right, Jason. And for the weather forecast, you mentioned it earlier. It looks like about 79 and sunny.
Lovely.
So it will be roughly 70 degrees, started the second half. Perfect day in Miami. What's going to happen?
Yeah, well, like I said, I think this would be a good time for Tar Heel fans to ask that maybe that some precipitation blows in, but no, that I think I actually agree with essentially everything Greg said, so I'm not gonna belabor that point. I think ultimately Miami's a more complete team between these two teams, and they're having a quarterback that can compete changes that team. They've had a lot of the other pieces over the years, but without a quarterback, they've just not been as good. They've got a quarterback this year, and North Carolina to me is a year away, really, from being more complete in winning this kind of game. I think it's a winnable game, but I do think Miami's ultimately going to win this game. I've got Miami winning at 41, actually to 38. So we're in the same ballpark there. I think this is going to be a barn burner of a game, and you hope that maybe Sam Howell has the football in his hands on that last drive like he did last year, and Carolina has a chance to pull that out.
You guys talk about Derek King and that Miami has a quarterback. What did Miami's quarterback throw for last year against Carolina?
Three something.
Yeah.
Give me a second here. Let me
Upper
look.
threes. I'll let you find it because it's relevant to my point.
All
I
right.
think that Miami, while they didn't have a quarterback really until Derek King got there, they had one that played really well last season against North Carolina. And I think Carolina was able to get it done on the back of Sam Howell making some plays. What was it, Greg?
It was
309.
Yep, 309, 30 of 39, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions, 7.9 yards per attempt.
How many yards rushing?
Who was that? Was it Williams?
Yeah.
He was sacked like 7 times, I think, something like that.
Well,
Williams.
to my point, Miami.
Hang on.
All right, well, folks are waiting.
I know, I got it. He completed 77% of his passes, which is solid.
And they ran for almost 200 yards on the ground last year as well, 179 last year. So
he rushed 10 times for 3 yards.
Okay, so he wasn't effective. That right there could be the kicker to my prediction. I'm going to hold my prediction until the Inside Carolina Live show.
Oh, you're tipping your hand already, though, Tom.
But I am definitely tipping my hand because
you're a believer.
I think it's time. You know how Matt gets up on the big screen there before the football game starts in Kenan Stadium? I think it's time for Carolina to take a step forward.
Tommy, UNC's record against Miami since the Hurricanes have been in the ACC?
3-12.
8-8. Yep.
8-8?
Yeah.
How many times have they won down there recently? Cam Sexton did it. Did Yates do it? Well, anyway.
They lost in 18 and in 16. Down there.
They're not wearing stormtroopers, as people on the message boards think that matters. Anyway, we'll wrap it up. It's getting kind of belaboring the point. I think it's time for Carolina to take a step forward or be the Carolina of old. We'll see what I decide on the Inside Carolina Live show. This has been the Game Plan Podcast. I'm your host, Tommy Ashley, joined by Jason Staples and Greg Barnes.
And Jason Staples' children.
Yeah, Jason Staples, the whole family. It's been fun, though. That's what makes it. We're all family here. They talk about the Carolina family. Inside Carolina is stronger than that. Boys, it's been real. Greg, safe travels.
All right. Have a good one, guys.